Perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being patient. I want to quickly start with the deck. My name is Nancy Sanchez. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator here with TPA. We have the lovely Ariel who's going to get us started. I'm just going to quickly take about 5 minutes of your time, and then I'll turn it over. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, perfect. So first, I just want to say thank you to Wondery, who makes our educational events possible by being our community building sponsor. We have some amazing upcoming events. If you haven't signed up for them, I highly recommend it. On August 20th, we have a first with UMO, which is Murder and Silence in El Salvador. It's one of our AMBIES winners, and they're really going to talk about distribution, cross-border audience growth, and platform strategy. So really hoping that people will sign up for that one. And then we have some more events from Ariel to continue her little webinar series here on September 12th and October 20th. If you are not a member of TPA or know somebody that isn't and would love to join us, use TPA 25 for 25% off your first year membership. And if you're not following us on social media, please do so. We're always looking to grow. These are all our social handles. And that is it for me. So Ariel, I turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome. Can everyone hear me? Do I sound okay? I'm using these, but if they don't work well, I can change to something else. Feel free to let me know in the chat also. Okay, thanks, Andrea. Let me know how you pronounce your name. Sorry that I was late. The express train ran on the local and was 25 minutes. I was waiting in the station, so that was really fun. But we're here now, and we're going to talk about how to grow your podcast when you're kind of at a plateau. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can get started. This is the TPA August 2025. Here we go. Don't want to share the wrong tab. Okay, let's do it. Let's present. Just so that folks know, and I want to set the scene, I love when the chat is active. I know we only have 7 people here, but that means that there's a lot of opportunity for you to ask questions that are very specific to you. And I can probably answer those questions, so we can treat this as a consulting session almost with with only a few participants. So your podcast is not growing, and I have 3 questions that I think that you should be asking yourself and or your teammates and or of your guests and your listeners. And these things will help you drill down as to what might be stopping your podcast from reaching its full potential. Let's get into it. So first, a bit of the agenda. I imagine this is being recorded so that even folks who are watching this later are able to check it out. So, because I know that a lot of people here now already know who I am, but I'm going to give you a little bit of, yes, it's being recorded. I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer so that you understand why I am here and qualified to be sharing these things. Then I will ask you a few questions about you, because it always helps me when I am giving a presentation to be able to speak to specific examples that are in the room with us today. So for that, I will request your audience participation. Then we'll get into some reasons that your podcast growth might be stagnant. Then I will get into the 3 questions that are alluded to in the title of this presentation. Then we'll talk about 3+ solutions and also some takeaways. So I'm giving you 3 questions, but many answers and more takeaways. So that's the agenda for today. I will do my best to keep this within the hour. I know we started a few minutes late, but we will finish on time. And if any questions remain, I'm very available, and you can hit me up on the internet or find me at Podcast Movement later this month. Okay, I tried out a few cool things on Canva, so please, so apologies if there's animation going on here inconsistently. My name's Ariel Nissenblatt. I am on the board of governors at the Podcast Academy. I have been for about 2.5 years, and I've been a member since the founding of the Podcast Academy. I love the Podcast Academy. I believe in it. I want more people to love it and believe in it, and also do things like this. Like, you are very much within your membership rights to pitch some sort of learning opportunity. So if you have an area of expertise, I know Nancy would be interested in hearing about it and maybe setting you up to do a teaching opportunity like this. But in addition to being part of the board, I'm also the founder of a podcast recommendation newsletter called Earbuds that goes out every Sunday. It features a theme and 5 podcast episodes on that theme. And each week is curated by a different person. So if you have a podcast and you want to get your podcast featured in the newsletter, you are welcome to submit a list that includes 5 episodes, one of which can be one from your own show. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to earbuds.audio. That's the website. And then I want to answer this question. What really is podcast marketing? I think this comes up a lot in conversations because there are different companies throughout the podcast world that will call themselves podcast marketing companies, and they do very different things, right? There are some companies that are podcast booking agencies, and yet they will use the search terms and the SEO terms for podcast marketing so that they pop up when people search, how do I grow my podcast? There are people who are, there are podcast growth agencies, quote unquote, that want you to pay to grow your podcast on different websites throughout the internet. There are places that you can go to buy an ad placement that might call themselves podcast marketing websites. Those are all legitimate forms of podcast marketing, but what we're going to focus on here today is free or low cost ways for you to grow your podcast that, I will admit, take a little bit more time than just taking out your credit card and buying a few new followers, but they will be more sustainable and they will be more sticky. You want to make sure that when you are finding new people to listen to your show, that they are actually the right people to be finding your show, listening to it, sticking around from episode to episode, eventually becoming a loyal fan and subscriber, and maybe even somebody who pays for a subscription down the line. Podcast marketing is a lot of different things. Content marketing is a lot of different things. We'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about some of the nuances. And I also want to make sure that we talk about how not all growth is good growth. And I sort of mentioned this just a moment ago when I said, yes, you can pay for followers and technically your podcast will grow, but some of that growth might not necessarily be good in the long run. It might not be the right followers. And if you have any questions specifically about that, I will get into it, and feel free to type into the chat. And then I also want to know why you want to grow your show, which will come up in our next slide as well. So let's go to that one. I want to get to know you. I would love for you to tell me either in the chat or, since we only have about 11 people live right now, you can feel free to raise your hand and I will pick on you. And I'd love to know the name of your show, why you make the show, and how long you've been at it. So again, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to do this live. And if you are less willing to come on screen, please feel free to type some answers into the chat so that I can refer to some specific examples of folks who are here now. So I'll give a moment for people to start typing and for some hands to hopefully raise. And if not, I do know some people here, and I might call on you, Matt, or Keith, or Paulette. Okay. All right. We've got a bunch of hands raised. That's great. Or Brian. I know everyone here. I love this. Let's go with Brian. Brian, are you able to unmute yourself?
It shows that I am.
Yes, I hear you.
All right.
Yes. So tell us, what is the name of your show?
My personal project right now is called Feed Drops. I make it because I don't believe anybody else has ever rated and reviewed across 10 categories within a podcast episode and quantify clarity, editing, guest host dynamics. So I think it's unique. I don't know of any other show doing it. And we started this format 20 episodes ago. It had a different format in the beginning with a co-host, but that's doing it now. And I want to point something out. thank you for the opportunity to market my podcast, not only to people here, but people who watch the replay.
Yep. It's all part of marketing. Brian, question for you. You shared a tiny bit about the show, but you didn't actually give us the pitch line. What is it beyond just feed drops, which I can guess a little bit, but how do you describe it?
I describe it. That's a very good question. I allow people to submit shows. I pick shows. People recommend shows. I take a listen to the episode. And first and foremost, if it scores less than 7.0, I do not do an episode. I'm not here to tear anybody down or, wreck anybody. If it scores 7 or above, then I do an episode talking about it. I play a couple clips and I rate and review it. And my hopes is, number one, people can listen to my show and discover other podcasts. And number two, podcasters can listen to my review and rating, listen to the episode and see, if they agree with me and or not. And number three, that can be any podcaster, whether it's the podcast I reviewed or any podcaster out there, to hopefully improve their show.
Awesome. Perfect. Sounds like it goes really well with my podcast about podcast trailers, where I feature a trailer and then I talk about what I liked about the trailer, what I think could be improved, and ultimately it acts as a discoverability tool, both for people who are looking to get better at making short form audio and also people who are looking for their next thing to listen to, sort of in the same vein. I love that. Brian, thank you for sharing. I will now read Andrew's submission as well. Andrew says, the Integrated Schools podcast launched in November of 2018. Ultimately, make it contribute to creating a world where our children learn together so that we can learn to live together. Hat tip to Thurgood Marshall. Love that. Thank you so much. 2018, that's a long go of it. If anybody else wants to share throughout, feel free to type into the chat so that I can refer to you when I give examples, rather than, if you've been to my presentations before, you know that my mind goes to like beluga whales and coffee podcasts, which I just make up on the spot. So would rather deal with your examples. All right. So now let's talk about why we get stuck, reasons for podcasts becoming stagnant. These are just a few of the things that I've been thinking about lately. And let me say, before I get into each of them, that the reason I want to present this with you, AKA the problem statement, is so that you can think about the philosophy behind podcasts as you're listening to them, not just your own, but also others. When you come across a show, do they do some of these things? Or when you're working with a client that might have a podcast, or if you are chatting with somebody who is in your larger network and they have a podcast, and they're wondering why their show isn't growing, I want you to be able to point back to these things and ask these questions. And then ultimately, once we get to the solutions, you'll be able to kind of have a parallel to each one. So this is a really big one, content potential. A lot of times people think that their show is amazing, and it's just not. This happens a lot. This happens way more often than you'd think. I will give an example, because I know that I'm not going to give a specific example. I won't get too specific, but I did do a content audit and a marketing audit for a podcast earlier this week that it claimed to be about philosophy and self-help and self-improvement, but the podcast had a title. I'll make this up because I don't want to give the exact thing, but the gist of it was that the title was Sarah is Amazing. And I'm not even kidding. That is like a pretty close approximation to the actual title of the podcast. And that had nothing to do with the content of the podcast at all. I asked, is Sarah one of your co-hosts? Was Sarah ever one of your co-hosts? The answer was no. They just knew someone named Sarah. And still, this podcast purported to be about self-help and philosophy and things like that. And it was. I listened to the show. It was about self-help. It was about philosophy. But if I were somebody who was looking for a show about self-help and philosophy, I would not be searching Sarah is awesome. I would be searching for self-help, philosophy, terms like this. So a lot of times, the content, the things that make up the visual aspects of the show just isn't where we thought it would be. And one way to really check yourself on that is having somebody who doesn't know you or knows you but has never looked at your podcast look at your show, and you don't have to ask for more critical feedback than the following. What do you think my show is about based on the cover art? What do you think my show is about based on the title of this? What do you think this episode is about based on the title of this episode, or based on the first few sentences in the show notes of this episode? And then, of course, we want to think about the logistics of the content. Is it loud enough? Are there different volumes in different segments? We want to make sure that those things are squared away. Does the content have a natural flow to it? Are there things tying together your interviews from episode to episode, or your general themes within the show each episode? You can always get an audit. You can always have somebody professionally listen to your show and also do that through Brian's podcast, for example. That sounds like an interesting free question mark example for people to get some feedback. Brian, I imagine you have a submission form. Feel free to type it into the chat if so. And if not, then and it's paid, cool too. But there's also people that you can pay to listen to your show and make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. And this especially becomes important when you have a show related to your business or that has some sort of ladder up effect to something else that you're working on. For example, if you are a career coach and you have a podcast, you probably want to make sure that your podcast is aligned with your latest goal. Maybe you want to increase the number of people who are visiting your website. If that's the case, what are you saying on the podcast that's going to get them to the website? And then once they're on the website, what actions are they taking to show you that your podcast is doing what it is that you set out for it to do? Brian has confirmed that to submit your podcast there, it is free, and he put a link in the chat. All right. I love this comment from Andrea, so I will read this now. I'm attending on behalf of Bird Note, a daily podcast that's been airing for 20 years. Through short 2-minute stories about birds, the show inspires listeners to celebrate the beauty and wonder of our feathered friends and take action to care for them. Our director wanted to be here today, but had a conflict, so I'm listening in. Thank you for being here. And hello, director, who is probably watching this later. So let's talk about the next reason that people might get stuck. It's your addressable market. Who is your addressable market? Maybe you've hit your total addressable market. This is definitely a possibility. It could be like, let's give the example that I just read. The bird market. Who's in the market? Who's interested in listening to podcasts about birds? I'm sure you have some thoughts about this. Andrea, again, feel free to correct me on pronunciation. But there's an evolving community here, because there's people who love birds and know that they love birds, and then there's people who have, they're aware of birds. I think most people are aware of birds, but they don't know that they would love a podcast that daily dives into a 2-minute story about birds. And they need to just be hit with the right ad or the right piece of content at the right time that's going to convert them. So that's an interesting play on the total addressable market. But to use another example, we've got this integrated schools podcast where, let's see, ultimately your goal is to make the show contribute to creating a world where our children learn together so that we can learn to live together. Andrew, who would you say the podcast is for? Is it for educators? Is it for children? Is it for a combination? Is it for people who want to be educators or for people in policy? I think it's often important for us to have a for statement. Who is this show for? Who is this newsletter for? Who is this social post for? So that we can think about, when we're making the latest episode, who's going to listen to this and why are they going to listen to it? And can they get this content elsewhere? If so, how is my podcast episode additive to that conversation that's already happening? So when we're thinking about total addressable market, I'm often thinking about, who are the people that are obvious, that you know of, that are in that addressable market? And then who are the people that need what you're giving, but don't yet know that your search terms are what they need? And how are you going to get in front of those people? So even if you think you have a tiny niche, my guess is that you have at least a few more branches to the tree than you think. And we can try to give some examples of this. And then your distribution optimization. Is your distribution optimized? Are you actually everywhere that podcasts are found? Most likely you are, because you're in the Podcast Academy. So you are aware that once you upload your podcast to a hosting provider, you then click a few buttons and hopefully your podcast is available on Apple, on Spotify, and then on all of the places that pull from Apple Podcasts. But is your podcast also on the few other apps that require you to submit your RSS feed separately? Is your podcast available on YouTube, even if it's audio only? And we can talk a bit about that later. We're not going to focus too much today on the video aspect of things, but your podcast can be available audio only on video platforms, and that's a great way to take advantage of search in the second most popular search engine in the world. So that's YouTube after Google. So is your podcast actually available everywhere? And within that, is it optimized to be clicked on? Does it look like it belongs there? Meaning, if you go to Castbox, have you checked out your show, what it looks like on Castbox? And then have you made sure that you have verified that your RSS feed is yours on Castbox? Just to recap, your show will be available on Castbox, on Good Pods, on Overcast, on Pocket Cast, on all of these podcast listening apps that are not just Apple and Spotify. Once you are up and running via your hosting site, via Apple distribution, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've verified that your feed is yours. And the reason that you might want to do that is because you can then go ahead and add your social handles, usually on the landing page for Good Pods and for Castbox, and even for a few more of these apps like Fountain. And then you can actually respond to people as they leave you comments. And you can also address people who are specifically leaving you comments on these different platforms, right? Like you'll hear often at the end of a podcast, leave us a rating and review on Apple, and on Spotify, feel free to answer our poll. And then on Castbox, we notice that we're getting a lot more comments lately, and that just acknowledges the people who are listening there. And there could be some people here today that are hearing about Castbox for the first time, but I will tell you that there are tens of thousands of people who are listening to podcasts on Castbox every day. Same with the other podcast listening apps that I've listed. And because of that, it is at least worth checking out in your hosting provider data what your share of listeners are on these different platforms that might have 1 or 2% of your listening. Again, it might not be a huge number, but I think it's safe to assume that if there are some people who have discovered you there are more people who might be interested, and it's worth looking into where those people are coming from, how they're discovering you, and if they're leaving you comments. So is your podcast everywhere? Has your content reached its potential when it comes to the quality of the storytelling or the quality of the actual the sound? And have you reached your total addressable market? And if you have, where else can you look? Where else can you look? What other content might you be able to not necessarily steer in the direction of, but maybe highlight? Maybe you do a segment that could be moved up to the front of the show that would help address a certain segment, a certain subsegment of the market that is not addressed because it's usually at the back of the show. So thinking about how all of your content comes together and hits the people who need it at the right time. So these are some of the reasons that we get stuck. I also would love to know some of the reasons that you think you're getting stuck in your podcast growth. I imagine that I have some people here today who have had the same download numbers for every episode for the last while. And if that is true for you, feel free to share a bit about that, either in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and give a little anecdote and market your show, you're welcome to do that. And in the meantime, I'm going to read this comment from Keith, who says, somewhat related to what Ariel was saying, our podcast was called You First, but no one really knew what that meant. We recently rebranded as Disability Deep Dive, which we think is a much clearer and more informative title. That's great. And if I remember correctly, Keith, your podcast was You First, and then it did have a colon after it, the Disability Rights Podcast, if I'm not mistaken, which is helpful, but I think it definitely works to also have that right up front.
Yeah, this is Keith. It was a bit of a mouthful, and nobody remembered the whole name. Really, it was the You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast, which also having Florida in there Florida made it look like it was more regional, and it's not. It's really not about Florida, so it just was a mess. So yeah, the rebrand is. 3 episodes in so far, so we don't have a lot of data, but so far, so good.
Nice. And I'm going to read this comment from Matt, who says the Sound Off podcast is a show about podcasts and broadcasts. Weekly since 2016, numbers have evened out at 2,000 downloads per episode. Per month, maybe one day per episode. With the integration of video, I'm looking for new ways to calculate success. I also wonder what subject matter should be covered as the broadcast audience diminishes. Very interesting, and thank you for sharing your downloads there. Love that question, and we can get into it a little bit later on when we have time for questions at the end. So if anybody else wants to share reasons you think you might be getting stuck or questions that you have about getting stuck, where your numbers are plateauing, feel free to do that in the chat or to come off mute and join me on stage. Now let's get into 3 questions that I want you to ask yourself about this process. What are my goals? And does each episode I publish serve them? And then do your, as a host and as a producer, are you active or are you reactive? And then also, am I planful? And the reason that this says notes under here is because I was going to look for examples, but instead I'm actually going to go with some of your examples that you've given me here today. So I would love for, if Matt, you would like to come onto the stage / unmute yourself. I can ask you this question live and we can get into your notes on what are your goals and does each episode you publish serve them?
So my goals are stories. So one of the things I've always been good at is interviewing people. So I interview people from broadcast and podcast to tell their backstory and as well give us a glimpse into the future.
Okay, and ultimately, if you were to, why do you make the show? Why do you make the show beyond you enjoy it?
I make the show to connect the industry. So one of the things that we love podcast movement. We love going to the podcast show in London, but I've always thought, is there a way to bottle this every week where people can have access to other podcasters and conversations for 52 weeks a year?
And I don't think you are the type of person who is at risk for not making your show anymore, even if you plateau at 2,000 downloads a month. But put yourself in the shoes of somebody who, they've got limited resources here, or maybe they've got pressure from higher up that says, we need to get to 3,000 downloads a month or else we need to stop making the show. What in that situation, how would that change the way that you make your show?
So it actually has, and so one of the things I began to push in a lot on was newsletters and becoming more disciplined by using a Substack or Beehive, as you suggested, to get the message out there. Whether it's about promoting your show every week or just talk in another way, in a publishing factor about what you're talking about every week, because not everybody's going to put the earphones on and listen, but maybe they want to also be a part of it with the newsletter. So that's been a really big jump for me in the last 6 months. And I even went so far as to buy myself a domain, and I bought it for the next 5 years to commit to myself. I will be doing this newsletter for the next 5 years. And
at
you
least
can
5
subscribe
years.
to it now. It's soundingoff.news.
Nice. Love that. I love a .news. Thank you for sharing. Kate, I'd love to bring you on stage if you're able. First, I'll read your comment. You host and produce Cramped, a podcast investigating period pain, why it's so understudied and untreated despite being 30% of menstruating people experiencing severe period pain. We started off strong, building a 3 to 4K downloads per episode pretty quickly, but have plateaued. Worried about some shadow banning on socials due to women's health content. Very interesting. Kate, are you able to join us?
Yes, hello.
Yay, hi. So I wanted to ask you this question. What are your goals and does each episode you publish serve them?
Yeah, my goals are to provide information for people who basically were me. I went 22 years with severe period pain, with having doctors offer me nothing, tell me nothing. I was unable to find information or get treatment for 22 years. I also felt completely isolated. And so this podcast is meant for everybody who is basically like me, anywhere from 14 to in their mid 30s, like looking for answers for this pain and looking for community or like some sense that they are not alone in this. And I do think every episode that I've published does on varying levels address these goals. Some very deep divey, very like fact info heavy, and some much more about like conversations, but every episode definitely either gives people information that they may not have had already or connects them to other people's experiences with similar things.
That's awesome. I mean, ultimately, the reason a lot of people might stop making their podcast if they plateau is because they haven't identified their goals. And that's why I think this question is so important for everybody to think about as it relates to their show is, what are your goals beyond hopefully making money one day and the sheer number of downloads that are often a vanity metric? What are your goals? And those goals could be I get to study this thing that affected me and hopefully help other people. I get to make video clips that also might go viral every once in a while, and that might contribute to me becoming a speaker on this topic. And I get to play around with technology. And for my day job, I work in technology, and therefore it's good for me to have experience in this. Those are just 3 random quick things that I came up with that might apply to you, Kate. And I think when people don't identify those reasons for themselves, it's very easy to say, you know what, I've been told the show is not getting 10,000 downloads per episode. Therefore I can't monetize, which is a misnomer in and of itself. And therefore I'm going to stop because it doesn't make sense for me to keep spending the money in order for this to happen. But if you've got these other things that you can point back to that are still thriving, those reasons are still reasons for you to keep doing this, then I think you're much more likely to keep going and keep trying out new things, which brings me to my next question to ask, which is, as a host or producer, are you active or reactive? And I think, Kate, if you're willing to stay up on the stage, this would be a good question for you. What I mean by this is, have you dictated for season 1? First of all, are you doing seasons?
Yes, season 1 it's a little weird because I got a grant to fund 10 episodes. And so those first 10 episodes were like super well produced, fancy. And I actually didn't plan to continue the podcast after that. I wanted it to live as a mini series, as a limited series. But the response from the listeners was such that, and it changed my life so much that I decided to continue it. So right now I'm doing season 1.5, which is a continuation with lower production value and looser planning. And I'm in the process of planning and fundraising for season 2, which will be similar to season 1, 10 episode deep dive on hormone function.
So from my perspective in answering this question, as a podcast host, are you active or reactive? I would say you're both here, right? You are reacting to the excitement that you felt from the people that listen to your show, from the, how impactful this was for you as a producer. And therefore you're making content specifically tailored to those people or to those questions that were left outstanding. Does that sound right?
Yeah, definitely.
And then you're also actively trying to develop what season 2 would be. Are you thinking when you're doing that about a combination between what you have already set out that you want to investigate or cover, and then also what kind of feedback you're getting from people?
It's an interesting question. I definitely think it works like for my production style, and because I'm not a scientist or a doctor, it works best if I'm following my own questions about these topics. Like if it has to be about answering my questions, because I can't be providing the answers as a first person source aside from this is my experience. But I think in season 1.5 and in season 1, I've been bringing other people on and getting their questions and then going and getting answers to their questions as well as my questions. And I do want to continue doing that because I feel like that's it's not just about me, it's about all of us having questions.
Yeah. And I mean, often the reason I ask this question, that as a host, as a producer, as somebody making this podcast that maybe has become plateaued in numbers, if you are somebody who is dictating everything that goes into the season, even though you're getting questions from people, responses to polls that you might put on social media, it's important to also acknowledge those things. Sometimes you can do that just on social media. And then other times you might bring some of that to your podcast and then actively acknowledge that you are taking into account the things that people have told you in your first season or in your recent episodes, and then not necessarily changing, but adding to whatever it was that you were going to be focused on. And I think what this does is it just shows that it's a two-way street between the listener and the creator, and gets your listeners to buy in a little bit more than if you were straight up recording, editing, posting, and not really ever acknowledging the people that are allowing you to keep recording, editing, posting. And there are a number of ways to do this. You can do a season 1.5 where it's mostly some sort of back and forth with a listener, or maybe you got a bunch of comments on social media and you want to address those comments. Or it could be something where in every episode you include a listener voice note answering a specific question. So there's a number of ways for you to be both active in what you do for yourself and the reason that you want to make your podcast, and reactive in that you are incorporating the listener. You're reacting to the listener who is taking their time to be part of your world. And then this kind of flows into, am I planful? Are you thinking about not only how to bring in these reactions from your listeners, but also, are you thinking ahead about how long you want your next season to be? Are you thinking ahead about if you want your seasons to be called seasons behind the scenes, or also to your listeners? What I mean by that is, like, Kate, you could have decided, like, I think people knew that you had funding to do 10 episodes. But then I imagine in your situation, you had to be like, that was 10 episodes and there's still so much more to say. So we're doing a 1.5. But you could have probably also just said something like, you know, we are now shifting to a new model and I'd love to hear from you about this new model. And then that might also inform how we do the next season 2 after this. How do you react to that? First of all, I heard you almost speaking.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I am both. I think I have got, like, season 1 was so planful and was like, I wasn't published yet for most of the time I was producing episodes. And so, like, there was nothing to react to. And so it was very, like, self-driven and, like, answering my own questions.
Yeah.
And then season 1.5, like, on purpose, I've gone totally the other direction of, like, really opening up to asking for more questions as more stuff is coming in. I'm like, yeah, tell me more stuff, join the community, like, let me hear from you. And I think, like, I just got surgery and was, like, out of it for a few weeks, but I'm starting to be like, right, I need to plan again. Like, this is driving me crazy. It is a little chaotic and, like, I need to get back on a plan. And hopefully, I think, like, the goal for season 2 is to find a happy medium between active and reactive and, like, planful and taking advantage of opportunities. And also not trying to take on everything at once, like, being realistic about, like, it's just me, right? Like, I want to do all this stuff for growth, but, like, how many emails and, like, outreach can I possibly do in a week, you know?
Right. Yeah. You have to choose a few things and whole ass those few things rather than half-assing a million different things.
Exactly.
So these are just a few questions to ask yourself, and there's no right or wrong answers to these questions. What are your goals, and does each episode that you publish serve them? As a host, are you active or reactive? Are you both? How do you square those things in different types of episodes? Do you want to integrate reactivity into certain episodes, or every episode in a certain segment? That could be an interesting way to look at it. And am I planful / what does being planful mean to me? All right. Now let's go to some takeaways, some solutions, actually. Okay, so I love. I've only got 9 minutes left, but we're gonna get through this, and then hopefully we'll have 2 or 3 minutes for questions. I like to give concrete things that you can do. So first of all, I am a big fan of writing out the 3 reasons that you make your show that are not downloads and dollars, and reassessing those reasons quarterly. Again, just to list off a few of them, it could be, I like playing around with technology. I like practicing my interview skills. I like being able to say that I have a podcast. I like being able to post clips on social media. A number of different reasons. Feel free to type them into the chat, and there could be ones that are specific to your industry or to whatever it is that you're podcasting about. Feel free to reassess those and have those up on a whiteboard in your room, so that when you post an episode that you're really proud of and it only gets, I don't know, X number of downloads per episode and it's not as high as you wanted, you are still fulfilling those 3 reasons, and that is enough for you to continue. What about your goals? Name 3 concrete, data-driven and trackable goals that you can check in on regularly. So, are you getting comments that lead to you DMing the people who are giving those comments, and then that leads to some kind of phone call that is additive to your life or to your business? That could be a goal for you. Another goal, I think it's important for us to outline these things that, again, your goals are not just, I want 10,000 downloads per episode because I heard that that's a good number. And then make a commitment to respond to every comment that you receive, no matter how short the comment or how few there are. I recently came across an Instagram account for a podcast that I was doing some work on years ago, and they're posting videos with every episode. They're posting clips, and they're getting a ton of comments. And not even some of the clips are getting 3 comments, some are getting 2, some are getting 15. They're not responding to any. And I think that what you can do with these comments is A, read them and try to figure out if there's some hidden content request in there. B, respond to them just so that you're keeping your social media active. C, post the comment on your Instagram story, or post the comment on your LinkedIn, or wherever it is that you have the highest following, just to show people that there are other people who are listening to this and finding value in it. So even if the comment is small, even if it's a molehill, make a mountain out of it in any way. And then also consider surveying your audience, even if you don't hear from that many people per episode, even if it starts out as just reaching out to the people that do leave you comments on social media, or do leave you comments on Spotify, or are leaving you comments on Apple Podcasts. Consider surveying those people with a 5-minute phone call. Hey, can I ask you a few questions about how you interact with the show? Kate says, when you say comments, do you mean specifically on social media or also on podcast platforms? Anywhere that people are reaching out to you, anywhere that people are raising their hand and saying, I listened to this, here is my response to it, I recommend trying in some way to be in conversation with them. And it's not always super obvious, meaning like if somebody leaves you a rating and review on Apple, you can't reply to that, but maybe you can search their username. Maybe you can read their comment aloud on your next episode and disagree with it or agree with it. Maybe you can screenshot it, post it on social media, and blur their name if you want, but also start a conversation based on whatever it is that they just said to you. And then my last solution here is use your conversations to plan future content and engage with your audience. Self-explanatory, but just wanted to read out the last one. And now just a few takeaways. Plan your content with your audience in mind, be responsive to them, float ideas by them. Like I said, even if you only hear from a few people, if you want to do an audience survey, take that information and apply it to your listeners. Try to figure out if that does genuinely apply to more of your listeners, or if those are the people that are outstanding. And this is like my number one thing that I love all the time is be a student of the craft. Find out who your competition is. What are they doing that you like? What are they doing that you don't like? Be aware of those podcasts. Be aware of those Instagram accounts. Be aware of those LinkedIn influencers. Follow them, listen to their stuff, read their stuff, respond to it. And more importantly, eventually reach out to them and figure out how you can collaborate in some way. Be a student of the craft. That's both the craft of your industry and then also of the podcast industry that you're a part of. And that is now slowly but surely evolving into also the video spaces, the YouTubes of it all. And then also a question of, do you have the time, energy, and bandwidth to commit to making actual changes to the content / marketing of your show? This is huge. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning. The Sarah Rocks podcast, I did a whole audit with this podcast, and I gave him a lot of pieces of advice that I think were very low-hanging fruit. And he at the end said something like, you know what, I actually don't want to do any of that. And I said, okay, then why do you want to grow your podcast in the first place? Like, what's the reason for this? And I think that is probably the most important thing to figure out. Do you want to grow the show because you love the message that you've got out there and you want more people to find it? Do you want to grow the show because you know that maybe you have a following on TikTok, but your podcast, the CPM rates are much better for advertisers? Do you want to grow the show because it feels good? That's enough of a reason too. But if your reason is, I just want to have fun, and then you're pissed off about how the show is not growing, there are some things that you can and should do to actually make sure that the show is growable and then growing. Those are my takeaways. And we've got about 4 minutes left for questions. So feel free to type them or go off mute and answer them in the chat. Say them out loud or throw them into the chat. This is my contact information. Feel free to be in touch with me about any of the things that I said. If you agree, disagree, if there's nuances that I did not cover. I will say there's definitely nuances that I did not cover because it's impossible in this world of so much content in so much different variety to speak for everything and everyone. So I shared what I think is my best approximation of how to grow a show based on a few questions that you can ask yourself and just be aware of in the podcast space. And I hope it was helpful. And I am here for the next 3 minutes to answer questions. So thank you for joining. All right, we've got a question from Andrea. Do you have any thoughts or insights on the most useful trackable metrics, especially with the new lower download numbers after the Apple update? Yeah. What hosting site do you use is my first question. Second, I think it's interesting to track your followers on Spotify and on Apple now that you can do that. I think it's interesting to track your listen through rate. I think that's huge. And I think that that is something that we should be reporting on more so than the downloads. Ultimately, especially if your podcast is more niche down, it's for bird lovers. Are the people listening to the show all the way through every episode? Are they taking action when you tell them about a local birding event? Are they interested in the advertisers that you are telling them about? I think those are all metrics that you can track that are not just how many people are finding the show, pressing play, and then not necessarily even sticking around for it. Matt says, fast tips for getting people to take your online survey. First, I would need to see what the survey looks like and how you're asking the questions. So, and also like, what's the process to getting to that survey? Is it linked in your show notes? Is the link some sort of really ugly link that's really long and hard to navigate? Does it look like your website, or does it look like a Google Docs form? A Google form. And then within that, are you mentioning it on every episode of your podcast, but also are you saying the same thing on every episode in order to get people to listen to take the survey? So right here, you mentioned that it's through DAI, dynamic ad insertion. That probably means that it's around that your call to action sounds the same from episode to episode, which might fall on ears that don't want to hear it after a while. So try a new reason every once in a while. The show notes is great, and it's built into your pod page. It's good. You want people to come across it. Give people a reason in your DAI advertisement in order to get people there. First of all, consider offering some sort of DAI, meaning $5 for, are you giving them $5 if they fill it out? Give them some sort of incentive for filling it out, or enter them into a raffle of some sort, or maybe you'll have them on as a guest. And then also be very clear with people about why you want them to fill it out. Is it because you want a critical mass of people to fill it out so that it's more statistically significant? That's great. But also, what are you going to do with that data? Is that data going to improve the show? Tell people, if you fill this out, the more people that fill this out, the more likely I am to get some genuinely good information that will make the show a better experience for you. Even though that's so obvious, it might just help them understand that you're a real person, not just regurgitating reasons for them to do something in a world where a million people want them to do things all the time, want them to take action all the time. Let me know if that's helpful. I can get more specific offline, but it is now 2:00, so I'll hand it back over to Nancy. And thank you to the Podcast Academy for the opportunity, and thank you all for joining today.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to our upcoming events. Ariel has 2 upcoming events, so make sure to register for those so that we can continue with this webinar series. Thank you, Ariel, for your time, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Bye, everybody.